Jason knew the moment the scan chirped. He was screwed. The AI's assessment blared across the hall with dispassionate finality. Specimen 780, 2 ampere, Homo sapiens, musculoskeletal fragility extreme, cardiovascular efficiency substandard, reflex latency, borderline, pain tolerance red zone. Conclusion: the most fragile creature in the class. Silence, then snorts, then the awful synchronized chittering laughter of the Brockery cadets, like gravel grinding glass. One of them, 3 meters tall and armored in natural exoskeletal plating, flexed his shoulders and made a show of scanning Jason again on his personal HUD, pretending to squint. Is that thing breathing through its mouth? Jason stood still, spine locked straight. He didn't raise his voice or drop his head. He nodded slightly to the AI booth attendant, a bored, translucent Yiru, who shrugged and floated off on a hydro sled. This was Linvahr Intergalactic University, the most advanced education nexus in 6 sectors, a place where over 200 species shared halls to study diplomacy, ethics of interstellar conflict, and the brittle bones of peacekeeping. No one had mentioned the full-body scan at orientation. The hallway crowd dispersed slowly, still chuckling. Jason headed to his dorm, face carefully blank. Inside, he sat on the edge of the polymer bunk for a long moment, then pulled up his tablet and began to catalog the utility corridors near the engineering wing. The university's rulebook was clear: no cross-species physical aggression. Doing so would not only risk expulsion, but could escalate into interstellar diplomatic consequences. But it didn't say anything about countermeasures or improvisation. He wasn't here to throw punches. He was here because 3 years ago, Earth's tentative ambassadorial team had been dissolved in shame after a trade delegation to a border planet ended in a massacre. Jason's sister was on that team. She was 26. It wasn't even a war zone, just a misunderstanding that spiraled like oil catching fire. He didn't care about glory. He wanted to know why peace failed so easily. 2 days later, he was ambushed behind the engineering lab. He'd expected it. He'd studied their class schedules and behavior patterns. Brocari culture glorified dominance, probing the weaknesses of others was how they defined respect. There were 2 of them, upperclassmen. One blocked the corridor's mouth, the other pushed Jason back against a recycling unit with a fist the size of his ribcage. We thought we'd test that fragility score, just for science. Jason's fingers twitched. It was subtle. He'd wired a thermal relay to fail 3 meters behind them and diverted a maintenance drone's cleaning cycle. When the relay blew with a loud pop, steam burst out of the conduit, enveloping the corridor. The Brockery blinked in confusion, and Jason slid low, rolling past their feet, triggering the drone's override on his tablet. The drone shot forward, emitting high-pitched sanitation alarms and spraying disinfectant foam across both attackers. It wasn't dangerous, just sticky and highly fluorescent. The taller Brockery tried to charge through the steam, slipped, and hit the ground hard enough to crack a knee plate. Jason didn't even watch. He kept running, zigzagging down the maintenance shaft until he reached the student commons. Security caught up 3 minutes later. Footage pulled. The AI warden said dryly as it reviewed the play-by-play, initiating disciplinary review of the aggressors. The footage went viral by midday. First among students, then faculty, and finally to the AI Corps overseeing interspecies relations training. Jason didn't celebrate. His shoulder was bruised from the recycling unit impact, and his heart rate hadn't settled until an hour later. He filed a medical report through the official channels. No broken bones. No internal bleeding. But it hurt when he turned too fast, and the university's medbot put him on restricted movement for 72 hours. That didn't stop the stares. "Is it true?" a Yiru student named Vel asked, leaning over in aquatic hover gear. "You defeated 2 Brocari without laying a finger on them?" "I didn't defeat them," Jason muttered. "I outmaneuvered them." "Semantics," Vel bubbled. But there was something sharper now in his usually sluggish tone. Jason became something strange, half joke, half anomaly. Professors began calling on him during ethics seminars. One even sent a quiet invitation to join an elite diplomacy simulation class reserved for third-year students. Jason accepted without hesitation. The sim room was massive, dozens of consoles, atmospheric modifiers, and live projection feeds. The other students barely acknowledged him at first. That changed after the Brakari Yiru simulation. The scenario. A Yiru mining guild accused a Brakari transport fleet of seeding contaminants into a shared asteroid corridor. The Brakari claimed strategic necessity. The Yiru threatened withdrawal from the Galactic Minerals Accord. The Brakari student, a sharp-jawed specimen named Rurkan, growled, "We will not apologize for defending our supply routes." The Yiru delegate hissed back, "Defending with radioactive ash?" Jason studied them. The tension rose. Neither side was bluffing. Then he leaned into his mic. "Yiru emissary," he said calmly. "I ask permission to offer a recitation." The room blinked. Even the sim AI paused its timer. Jason continued. "There is a line in Song of the Sinking Light, an old Yiru poem. Those who stir silt where starfish sleep will awaken the tide. It's a proverb, right?" The Yiru delegate stiffened. "It is sacred." Jason nodded. "Then let the Brakari contribute to your reconstruction of Talth's reef sanctuaries. Not as penance, but as a tide weaver's gesture. In return, you drop the accusations and declare mutual navigation rights restored, a clean tide." The silence held for 5 full seconds. Then the Yiru emissary bowed its fronds. "Agreed." The simulation ended. The AI displayed, "Crisis diffused. Unorthodox method employed." The class didn't clap, but a few stared like they'd never really looked at Jason before. That night, he got called into a private meeting. A second scan. This time not of his muscles, of his mind. Neurological maps lit up. Pressure response, abstract inference, cultural mapping. Jason's brain wasn't matching baseline human profiles. Not exactly. The AI intoned. Subject demonstrates anomalous cross-species empathy, elevated pattern recognition in asymmetric conflict simulations. Possible cognitive training detected source unclear. One professor, a Larkin with 12 feathered eyes, looked disturbed. Is he manipulating them? Or understanding them too well? Another, an aged Falari diplomat with facial tendrils coiled like ivy, smiled. He sees patterns, and he listens, something your war academies fail to teach. Jason didn't speak. He sat with his back straight and his hands calmly folded, hiding the tremor in his right pinky. He hadn't lied, but he hadn't told them everything either. His sister had loved poems, especially the ones written by non-humans. She said they were the only way to feel the galaxy's grief without losing your mind. The morning after the neurological scan, Jason awoke to 37 unread messages. Most were nonsense memes from students he barely knew, offers to join clubs with names like the Interspecies Debate Combat League, and one suspicious invite to a Yiru-exclusive poetry circle. But buried in the heap was a flag notification from Linvahr's Diplomatic Simulation Division. Assignment adjustment. You are hereby reassigned to the Apex Simulation Seminar, Tier 7. Attendance begins today, 4th interval. Non-compliance will result in administrative review. Tier 7. That wasn't a class. That was the upper edge of academic gravity, the place where offspring of planetary envoys, military strategists, and career negotiators spent their final terms training for real-world assignments. Jason hadn't even completed his first term. He closed the message. His shoulder still ached. The med patch itched under his shirt, and his ribs flared with a dull warning if he twisted too fast. He moved slowly as he dressed. There was no room to fake strength anymore. Half the faculty had watched him improvise a diplomatic maneuver from a verse written 3,000 cycles ago. He didn't need to pretend to be strong. He needed to stay sharp. Tier 7 simulations weren't about solving staged disputes. They were about surviving them. Jason entered late. The room was hexagonal, dimly lit, with 6 command stations arranged like spokes around a central projection sphere. 4 students were already seated. A Sarathi named Jal, sleek and reptilian. A Brakari female, with scarred chitin named Talith. A Yiru named Vel, his aquatic fronds now held in clipped discipline, and an Iskarii, a glittering insectoid who vibrated in near silence. No one greeted him. A hologram activated at the center console. The AI's voice was clinical. Today's simulation: the detritus standoff. Scenario parameters: diplomatic breakdown, resource scarcity, conflicting historical claims. Objective: prevent violence without violating planetary sovereignty or triggering sanctions. Jason scanned the data flood. Two minor species, Junari and Var, were disputing a chain of moons rich in volatile isotope fields. Both had overlapping religious claims, conflicting with a recently discovered subterranean tech cache of unknown origin. The team splintered almost instantly. Jal wanted to flood the moons with a neutral bioscrubber and declare them uninhabitable. Talith demanded a show of force to deter escalation. Vel floated cultural artifacts as potential bartering chips, but grew frustrated when no one listened. Jason didn't argue. He observed. Then, quietly, he typed into the simulation AI's cultural lexicon console and requested a cross-translation between Junari hymn rhythms and Var ancestral migration chants. There was a match barely, but enough. He built a speech for a fictional third priest, invoking both species' creation myths. He filtered it through a cracked voice synthesizer, added atmospheric effects mimicking a historically significant eclipse, and uploaded it to a decoy transmission node in the simulation. The room froze when the message played. It wasn't loud. It was haunting. Two tones, reverberating in shared cadence, with phrases echoing both worlds' fears and hopes. The speech ended by blessing the moons as wounds of the sky, too sacred to own. The simulation adapted. Both factions stood down. The cache was sealed pending historical arbitration. AI displayed conflict resolution. Diplomatic neutrality achieved through synthesis of belief. Talith stared at him like she'd swallowed a glass shard. You faked a god. Jason didn't look at her. Number, I gave them something to believe in together. By the end of the second week, he had 3 nicknames in circulation. Some called him the Shadow Envoy. Others, mostly among the Bracari, simply called him Flinch. The Yiru favored mind hands, a phrase lifted from a mythic weaver who tamed storms with dreams instead of nets. He didn't correct any of them. But not everyone was impressed. Professor Reltar of the Iscariai faction requested a faculty review of Jason's continued enrollment in Tier 7. His argument was formal and publicly accessible. Cognitive anomalies aside, the human's methods are circumventional, not foundational. They create dependency on deceit. This is not diplomacy. It is narrative exploitation. Others countered subtly. Professor Elia from the Terran Cultural Attaché Program argued that Jason's methods represented the evolution of soft power, turning cultural noise into connective tissue. The faculty split. Meetings grew longer. Rumors hinted that even the central AI had altered its heuristic profile to better track Jason's inputs during simulations. Behind it all, whispers bloomed like spores in the air ducts. That Jason had access to pre-contact Earth VR wargames. That his mind had been shaped by immersion in failed peace accords. That he'd been trained, not educated, in counter-narrative diplomacy. He ignored them, but he never stopped watching. One evening, Vel cornered him in the dim observation sphere above the arboretum. You're making enemies, Vel said, not unkindly. His fronds swirled in calming arcs. Bracari students petitioned to restrict human access to AI lexicons. They say you're distorting species heritage. Jason leaned on the railing. I'm only using what's already there. You're bending it. I'm respecting it enough to weaponize it. Vel floated in silence for a long time. You know, he said eventually, when you first arrived, I thought the scan was wrong. Jason frowned. About my fragility? Vel's fronds curled inward. About your relevance. The real crisis came sooner than anyone expected. A Yiru terraforming colony in the Vaeth Drift had detected Bracari recon vessels in violation of demarcation accords. Bracari Fleet Command denied involvement, then admitted the vessels were part of an autonomous deterrence patrol. Linvar's faculty convened an emergency committee. The university had a mandate from the Interstellar Council. In escalating crises, it could dispatch neutral observers or negotiators under academic protocol. Normally, a Tier 7 senior would be selected. This time, The debate fractured along species lines. Professor Reltar lobbied for Talith. Others pushed for Vel, citing cultural ties. But Professor Elia proposed Jason. "This is a diplomatic crisis," she said before the entire assembly. "Not a show of strength. We need someone who can hear both sides' ghosts in the wind." The vote passed narrowly. Jason didn't sleep that night. Not because he was scared, though he was. Not because the mission was dangerous, though it was, but because it wasn't a simulation. There would be no AI safety net this time. In the days leading to departure, something unexpected happened. Jal, the cold Sarathi strategist, offered him a flight-safe data module with intercepted Brakari fleet chants. "They use these before engagements," he said. "You might find a crack." Vel sent Jason an annotated guide to Yiru nonverbal negotiation gestures, subtle fin flicks, pulse patterns, sacred silences. Even Talith approached him near the auxiliary hangar. "Don't get killed," she said without looking at him. "If you do, they'll say the scan was right all along." Jason nodded. "And if I don't?" She paused. "Then I'll pretend I didn't warn you." As Jason boarded the long-range diplomatic shuttle, clutching a data slate full of conflicting mythologies and half-finished poems, he turned once to glance back at the university towers. He looked small, fragile. The human body hadn't changed. The bones were still breakable, the lungs still shallow, but his eyes, those hadn't looked fragile in weeks. The AI at the helm flickered once as he strapped in, adjusting its assessment tags in real time. New designation: Cognitive Strategic Asset. Anomalous Diplomatic Unit. Jason exhaled slowly. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a prophet. But he could hear stories hiding inside war drums. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Jason landed on Vaeth Drift under heavy escort. Not a military detail too provocative. Instead, a diplomatic triad from Linvahr met him at the pad. One Yiru, one Brakari, and one neutral Delrathi functionary, whose smooth pupil, less gaze, never blinked. The triad's presence meant only one thing. The situation was one misstep from becoming an incident. The Yiru colony sprawled like bioluminescent coral across the twilight edge of the planetoid. Soft tides shimmered beneath transparent domes. But Jason's transport wasn't directed there. Instead, he was taken to the orbital platform, where both species' envoys had agreed to meet under strict observational protocol. 3 moons orbited the drift. One had already been terraformed by the Yiru, a shallow ocean biome engineered to sustain their spawn havens. Another had been scanned by Brakari drones, and now bristled with kinetic shielding. No weapons officially, but Jason could see the modular launches from the viewport. The 3rd moon half-formed, mineral-rich, and unclaimed was the problem. Scans revealed deep subterranean voids that pulsed with trace radiation and optical signatures too regular to be natural. The envoys believed it was a memory mine. If the term sounded vague, that was because no one really understood what memory mines were. All across fringe worlds, these hollow anomalies were discovered with shifting walls, faint audio loops, and sensory echoes that mimicked ancient trauma. Many thought they were psychological artifacts from extinct civilizations. Others believed they were deliberate traps. To Jason, they were something worse: catalysts. The Yiru envoy, Embassary Resh, was older than any Jason had met. His fronds hung slow, like kelp under low tide. "We claim this 3rd moon by extension," Resh said. "It was within our drift path when colonization began. The Brakari intrusion was unprovoked." Brakari delegate Jalvis bared his teeth, though, with Brakari. That was just normal posture. "Your path was never registered with the Accord. The moon's mineral data was shared in open databases. Your silence was tactical." Jason, sitting between them at the neutral comm station, didn't speak for 34 seconds. He was counting. Brakari aggression came in rhythmic bursts, voice pitch rising every 4 seconds. Yiru tones dropped every 3rd wave, then spiked on syllabic emphasis. Jason wrote nothing down. His pad recorded all of it, but he trusted his ears more. "I want to enter the mine," he said finally. Both envoys turned to him. Jalvis blinked. "You want to breach an unstable artifact that manipulates cognition and stores unknown weaponized memories?" Resh swirled. Even we have not done that. It is too risky. Jason didn't blink. That's why it's the only place I'll get a real answer. They let him in under escort. One drone from each species, both unarmed. The entrance was a jagged fissure near the moon's equator. Jason wore a standard pressure suit. No armor, no dampeners. He had a pulse monitor linked to the neutral AI watching from orbit. Inside, the mind felt alive. Not breathing, not moving, just aware. The tunnels weren't carved. They had formed. Walls shimmered with lattice like impressions that flickered in his peripheral vision. Sounds echoed strangely too late, too soft, and there were voices, sometimes, that whispered in no known language. Jason focused on his steps. He didn't trust the lights on his helmet, so he walked slowly, using a local scan grid to mark his path. The farther in he went, the less technology worked. By the fourth chamber, his readings glitched. The Yuru drone began emitting low thrumming pulses as if afraid. The Brockery drone shut down entirely. That's when he found the basin. A shallow dip in the rock, just wide enough to stand in. At its center, a single image flickered on the surface projected by nothing. It was a view of the drift colony from orbit. Then it shifted. It showed Earth. Not present-day Earth. Old Earth. Cities on fire. A dust storm overtaking Chicago. A child standing on a balcony watching satellites fall like stars. Jason's breath hitched. The pulse monitor caught the spike. The AI pinged him. He ignored it. Another image. A Yiru birth pool, drained and shattered. Then a Bracari cradle nest. Its brood melted in atmospheric breach. Not simulations, memories, but not Jason's, not his species. The mine was sharing everyone's ghosts. He backed away, slowly. Every step felt heavier, as if memory itself had gravity. Outside, he collapsed near the fissure mouth. His vitals were stable, but his suit registered neurological stress, mild disorientation, visual lag, and a sharp, pulsing headache above his left eye. He refused medical evac. "I have what I need," he told the AI. At the summit held that night on the orbital platform, Jason limped in without ceremony. He walked to the console, loaded nothing. He stood there and waited until the room fell silent. Then he spoke. "The mind doesn't hold weapons. It holds wounds. Yours. Ours. Every species. I saw images from Earth's collapse, from your earliest wars. It doesn't belong to anyone because it remembers everyone." He let that settle. Resh didn't move. Jalvis's mandible's jaw. Jason corrected himself, clenched once. Jason continued. "You both want to own pain, to make it sacred, but pain doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the ones who survive it." He looked at them both. "Declare the mine a galactic memory archive. Neither of you touch it. Let Linvahr oversee it, with shared academic access under council audit." Resh spoke first. "Even if agreed, how do we frame it to our peoples? We cannot be seen backing down." Jason nodded. "You don't back down. You step forward, together. Issue a joint statement declaring a mutual discovery. The first interspecies trauma archive. Sell it as cooperation. Rebrand the drift, not as a battleground but as the memory moon." Jalvis grunted. "You mean lie." "No," Jason said, meeting his gaze. "You mean lead." It took 6 hours of drafting, edits, cultural modulation, and pre-translation before the statement was agreed upon. By the next planetary cycle, a coordinated release went out to 50 systems. Jason watched the press burst from the neutral lounge, legs trembling. The orbital medic Delrathi, silent and efficient, finally insisted on a full check. Jason didn't argue. Examination revealed stress-induced microtears in his calf muscle, mild dehydration, and borderline visual-audio dissociation from his time in the mine. No concussion, but the doctor warned him to expect flashbacks or emotional dissonance. He spent 2 nights in medbay. Not in silence, messages came in a steady stream. Professor Elias sent only one line. "Tacticians write reports. You wrote a narrative." Vel sent a haiku in Yiru-tonal script. Jason couldn't translate it precisely, but he felt the intent. Respect. Maybe even awe. By the time he returned to Linvahr, the simulation AI had updated again. His entry in the student ledger now carried 3 flags. Fragility score: red. Cognitive adaptation: black. Cultural weaponization potential: orange. He had become a subject of study himself. But more than that, he was a precedent, a case. The first confirmed cross-species diplomatic interventionist whose tactics blurred the line between understanding and manipulation. Some hailed him, others warned of the implications. But Jason didn't speak to the press. He returned to his studies, quietly, deliberately. And every morning, he ran. Even when his calf ached, even when the med scan pinged caution, he ran because fragility was real, and so was the choice to move anyway. It wasn't the awards, or the journals, or even the way first-year students started carrying recorders into class hoping to catch a quote that told Jason something had changed. It was the new simulation parameters. No longer hypothetical disputes, no dramatized conflicts between made-up species. The scenarios in Tier 7 had shifted toward realism so sharp it drew blood, actual treaties, declassified tensions. And for the first time, the name Homo sapiens appeared in the conflict profiles not as a footnote, but a participant. Jason sat in the simulation chamber, the last session of his cycle blinking softly across the hologrid. Scenario: Reconstruction Dispute, Murdath Sector. Species: Falari Vertical Bar Terran Coalition. Objective: Re-establish diplomatic relations post-terror incursion. Civilian casualties: confirmed. Trade embargo: active. Trust baseline: null. The other students filtered in slowly. Talith had a limp now. An old combat injury resurfaced after a trial sim. She acknowledged Jason with a short nod. Vel, polished and composed, floated into his station like ink blooming underwater. The AI began. What made this simulation different was simple. The human side was wrong. The Terran Coalition had authorized retaliatory economic pressure after a Falari vessel accidentally detonated in Terran space, leaving behind data shards now confirmed to contain navigational errors, not weapons. But the damage was done. 6 cargo freighters lost. 47 human lives. Jason knew their names were fictitious. He still felt the numbers in his teeth. He let the others argue. Jal proposed a joint memorial. Talith advocated for material reparations in exchange for de-escalation. Vel suggested a planetary heritage grant with Falari oversight. Jason leaned back, silent. The simulation didn't time out, it waited. Because this wasn't a puzzle anymore, this was a mirror. He finally stood. "None of that will work," he said softly. "Not because the gestures are wrong, but because they assume people are ready to let go." The others paused. Jason keyed open a comm panel, bypassing the normal channels. The AI didn't stop him. He played a clip. Not a speech, not an apology. It was a soundscape, the last transmission from one of the Terran freighters. Static, laughter, a half-finished song. Then silence. "I know how you expect this to go," Jason said. "Another clever solution. Another cultural twist. But you can't reframe a wound people haven't accepted yet." He turned to the Falari projection. "You want to restore trust? Name a star after each victim, one for each lost freighter. Not for compensation, not for politics, just so people can look up and remember." Vel blinked. "That's poetic." Jason looked at him. "It's how you leave room for grief." The simulation ended with a soft chime. Score: Resolution path achieved, long-form recovery protocol initiated. No claps. Just breath. Just silence. Afterward, Professor Elia called him in. The office was stark. Unlike most faculty chambers, there were no cultural artifacts, no planetary emblems. Just a wide view of the stars and a single screen. "I was going to assign you to the Malkari Restoration Conference," she said. "They're offering student envoy roles for post-colonial reparations advisory." Jason didn't speak. "But I'm recommending you for something else," she continued. "A post not yet formal, experimental. The council is considering a new division. Unofficial mediators, not diplomats, not soldiers, listeners, pattern seers, People who find the hidden threads. Jason's voice was steady. You think that's what I am? She smiled, tired, but certain. I think you're a bridge, and bridges hold when everything else breaks. 2 weeks later, he packed. Not everything, just what mattered. A single datapad, a field journal half filled with observation sketches, a memory crystal he hadn't yet dared play, recorded in the mine, sealed until he felt ready. The ship was smaller than expected. No entourage. No ceremonial send-off. But before he boarded, Talith approached. Still fragile? She asked. He lifted his bag with one hand, wincing slightly. Medbot says my shoulder's healed. Mostly. She studied him. If you get yourself spaced, I'm not writing your eulogy. I'd prefer a quiet sigh, he said. She snorted. You're getting a statue. Vel arrived moments later, gliding silently. He didn't speak. Instead, he handed Jason a small sphere, an aquatic compression orb. Inside it, a miniature bloom of Uru coral floated in stasis. For translation, Vel said, of emotions. Jason nodded. Thanks. I'll keep it alive. The last thing he saw before departure was the university spire disappearing behind solar glare. Inside the cabin, the AI flickered online. Designation: Jason. Human. Strategic emissary. Jason buckled in. Where to first? The screen pulsed. Unknown. Awaiting conflict. He smiled. Not because he felt ready, but because he finally understood that readiness was never the point. He wasn't here to fix the galaxy. He was here to remind it that sometimes the weakest voice could still speak the clearest truth. That diplomacy was not won with strength, but with the quiet, relentless work of understanding. And that fragility, when wielded with intent, could be the sharpest weapon of all.